Welcome to the second of our Marine Spatial Planning CPD sessions. My name is Ali Robinson. My background is marine geology and marine planning, and I'm going to be facilitating today's session. And I'm delighted that we have two fantastic speakers. We have a presentation from Climate, Energy and Environment in respect to the Marine Strategy Framework Directive and programme of measures that Ireland, its obligations around this programme of measures and achieving good environmental status. And then the Commissioner of Irish Lights will be presenting and be an opportunity to see the land-sea interactions and their extensive experience and knowledge of managing an infrastructure base within that land-sea interaction. So just a couple of things. I'm delighted with so many numbers on the call. Just to mention, there is a survey at the end of today's session, and we encourage everyone to fill it out because it really informs future sessions. We would hope to keep each presentation to around 20 minutes. We'll run one presentation after the other, and then at the end we'll have time for, I'm hoping, a Q&A session. And then just to mention, next week's the final session in the series, whilst today is looking at very interesting big picture topics. We'll be looking at coastal change and coastal resilience around the foreshore. So look, without further ado, I am absolutely delighted to introduce our next speaker, which is Cathal O'Mahony. Cathal is a marine policy advisor with the Marine Environment and Planning section of the Department of Climate, Energy and Environment. So Cathal is engaged in the implementation of policy and legislation linked to the marine environment, marine protection, nature restoration and spatial planning at both European and national levels. And prior to joining the department, Cathal was involved in 20 years research in UCC in terms of research on coastal and marine planning. So a wealth of knowledge there and experience, and absolutely delighted to have Cathal with us today. So Cathal, I'll hand over to you, and good luck.
Thanks very much, Ali, and I really appreciate the opportunity to present. So thanks to yourself, Terry, and Sean, who's helping out with the technical side of things as well. Really appreciate it. So over the next 20 minutes, I'm going to give an introduction on the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. So if you just move to the next slide there, please, Sean. Yeah. In a nutshell, the directive is around since 2008. It's considered the environmental pillar of Europe's integrated maritime strategy, and at its core is the ecosystem-based approach. And I know Ali mentioned that they've had some workshops on this in the past with the IPI community, but essentially that's balancing human activities and development with the protection then of our marine environment, and trying to ensure that we're maintaining, safeguarding the ecological integrity of important species and habitats in our marine environment. So over the next kind of 20 minutes or so, you're probably going to be hearing terms like good environmental status, descriptor, environmental targets, and hopefully at the end of the 20 minutes, you'll understand a little bit better what they mean in the context of the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. So, but before I go straight into the directive, I was going to just give a little bit of context in terms of the wider policy environment. So if we just move on to the next slide, please, Sean. So here, I just wanted to give you a bit of a sense of where the MSFD sits within a range of national, European and regional instruments that focus on our marine environment. And this is by no means an exhaustive list, but the ones included here are likely to be the ones that are probably going to be name checked over the next minutes or throughout the presentation. So, as you probably are aware, our marine and coastal waters are subject to a number of directives. There's obviously the Maritime Spatial Planning Directive, but there's also the Birds and Habitats Directive, Water Framework Directive, and others. Then in terms of here at home, we have our National Marine Planning Framework, and that's developed as Ireland's National Marine Spatial Plan. And that's to establish a blueprint for how we're going to develop our maritime area up to 2040. And like I said, the MSFD is the environmental pillar of the integrated maritime policy, but that's also where the Maritime Spatial Planning Directive sits. So they do speak to each other, and the environmental targets within the MSFD are noted within the Marine Maritime Spatial Planning Directive. So there's already a clear line of interaction between the environment and planning. And then that trickles down, like I said, into our national situation here, where we have the MAP Act then to ensure the implementation of the NMPF. The next one there on the list is the Nature Restoration Regulation. I think that one, it's a relatively recent instrument, but I think it's worth mentioning because it spans land, coast, and marine. So therefore, it's really going to require a lot of joined up thinking and effort in terms of its implementation. And under that regulation, there's a need to restore at least 20% of degraded habitats by 2030, with additional progress to be made by 2040 and 2050. And just to note that within the, I suppose, coastal and marine side of the regulation, they've grouped the habitats into a series of different groups. 1 to 6 are coastal, and then offshore group 7. So we're assisting with the offshore water ones in group 7. It's the National Parks and Wildlife Service or the implementing authority. So, but we're assisting on the offshore side of things. Then there's the OSPAR Convention, which is the Oslo-Paris Convention, which covers the northeast waters of the Northeast Atlantic, and that has its own strategy in place for the marine environment from 2020 to 2030. And Ireland is a contracting party to OSPAR. Why that's important is that it facilitates cooperation on a regional level, and I'll touch on that later, but also with non-EU jurisdictions. So that would include the UK and Norway, for example, in our case. So if you just want to move on there, Sean, just back now, so to the MSFD. And the overarching aim of the Marine Strategy Framework Directive is to achieve clean, healthy, biologically diverse and sustainably used marine environment. So I'm always struck by how simple that sounds when I say it, but it's quite a challenge, as you can imagine. So within the directive, achieving this aim is basically, it's referred to as achieving good environmental status. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a while. And essentially the thinking here is healthy and functional marine ecosystems are really crucial for how we adapt and mitigate to the major challenges, environmental challenges that we're facing. So climate change, biodiversity loss, and our seas provide us with so many ecosystem services, food, oxygen, transport, leisure, etc. And really MSFD is there to looking to safeguard these services. So here you can see the kind of process at play and the logic behind implementation. So you assess your environment against an ideal, against good environmental status. You then apply targets to close the gap between what's actually happening and the ideal, and then you monitor to see how effective you've been in those efforts, and then take action as needed. The MSFD, like I said, came into force in 2008, and it's implemented in 6-year cycles, with reporting every 2 years within those 6-year cycles. So we're currently in the 3rd cycle of the MSFD, and with each cycle, we've improved our monitoring of the marine environment and increased our understanding. But by the same token, we're also seeing an increase in the pressures that we're facing. If you just go to the next slide, please, Sean. So this is just a reminder of the task at hand, both the opportunity and the challenge. It's the size of our maritime area. And you can see there clearly, how much marine space we have. The size of our marine area is one reason why we really adopt, I suppose, a risk-based approach to assessing pressures under the MSFD. There really isn't merit in trying to assess everything, everywhere, all the time. It isn't feasible and probably isn't really practical either. So that's just to give you an idea of the scale we're operating at. And then this area is split into 25 reporting units, but not all of the descriptors under the MSFD are assessed in every unit. And so what's a descriptor? And that's on to the next slide, just to move on, please, Sean. So I mentioned good environmental status, and these descriptors you see here in front of you, these are the building blocks as to how good environmental status is achieved. And they're essentially different components of our marine environment. So you can see here, there's different types, but basically they can be split into those that characterize the state of our marine environment. So, for example, number 1, biological diversity, or number 6, seafloor integrity. But then also those that refer to pressures. coming from activities. So you can see there number 10, marine litter, 5, eutrophication. So I'm not going to kind of go into each one of these in great detail one by one, but just to say that each descriptor has its own set of criteria and its own set of indicators and various other elements attached to it that I'll go into in a moment. And I would say as well that not all descriptors are equal in the sense that some have more criteria associated than others. So, for example, biological diversity is quite a large one. And also the scientific understanding for each varies. So we have a really, really good, well-established understanding of the cause and effects of eutrophication, number 5 there. And we have really robust and mature monitoring systems in place. But the same probably can't be said for underwater noise. That's a kind of, I suppose, a newer pressure, if you like. And it's one where the science is still evolving. So just to bear that in mind as well. You can move on there, please, Sean. So this is where trying to explain the complexity here, and bear with me while I go through the slide. So the whole idea of the MSFD, it is quite a complex instrument, and it does require bringing together or integrating data from lots of different sources and at lots of different levels. So if you see the triangle here, if I was to use biodiversity as an example, descriptor number 1, that includes a number of features. So that would include fish, mammals, birds, reptiles, cephalopods. Again, each of which have separate criteria and indicators associated with them. So that's why the amount of information needed to determine GES is significant, and why we need to and the integration of data is really crucial, which you can see there on the graphic on the right-hand side, the different programs that are used in terms of our monitoring. So in there you can see, for example, there's already information taken from other directives, such as the Water Framework Directive and the Habitats Directive, but there's also information taken from Infomar or Seabed Survey program in Ireland. So it's just to give an idea of the complexity that's involved. You can move on there, please, Sean. So I mentioned OSPAR at the outset, and this is where OSPAR comes to play, because as well as integrating data we use for national reporting to other directives, like I said, the Habitats and Water Framework Directive, we can also work with neighbouring countries to understand if there's a regional signal at play. So is this, for example, is there a problem really specific to Irish waters, or is there a bigger issue that we need to get our heads around? And this is really important in the sense that it really, it puts, I suppose, an onus on us to collaborate with other member states in areas such as where we've shared waters in the Northeast Atlantic. So OSPAR, this is where OSPAR really fulfills a really critical role. And by combining our data sets with other countries, we can perhaps introduce more confidence in our results. We're also able to tap into the expertise that each member state has, or each contracting party has across the Northeast Atlantic. And we're able to develop assessment methodologies that we can apply across the board. And this is really important in terms of the regional implementation of the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, that we're trying to work towards a common implementation, and also working towards solutions as appropriate. So you can just move on there, please, Sean. Great, thanks. So here I just, and you can just flick, there's a couple of animations here, Sean, you can just flick them open if you don't mind. So just going back to the 11 descriptors, I just wanted to flag maybe where there's an interaction between, say, planning and the marine environment. So if we take, descriptor 2, which is non-Indigenous species, evidence there, for example, shows how hard structures associated with coastal marine development can maybe provide a rootway for non-Indigenous species to take hold. But then also on the flip side, I've seen work where particularly older hard engineering coastal protection structures have been repurposed to support biodiversity. So there's two sides of the coin to consider. But obviously then things like eutrophication, you've got land-based source of pollution, you've got demands on water treatment services and infrastructure. If we move to descriptor 10 in terms of the plastics and microplastics, obviously coming from land-based sources and potential hotspots, for example, maybe where tourism is intense. There's also microplastics can be released from substances that we use in the maintenance and treatment of vessels, and also structures that we place at sea. So for most descriptors, you can really draw a line between planning and the marine environment, one way or the other. You can just move on there. Thanks, Sean. So here, I suppose what's important here is just to consider how scale and cumulative impact are critical, and how the pressure being placed on the marine environment is very much dependent on these two factors. So obviously, if you're looking at a turbine going into a body of water, or then a larger scale development such as a wind farm, and then you're looking at multiple wind farms, and then you're looking at a sea basin scale as to how are all these interacting at different scales, and what's the cumulative effect across the sea area. You can move on there, please, Sean. Thank you. So I mentioned environmental targets at the outset, and the importance of environmental targets is where trying to bridge the distance between the actual state of our marine environment, so what we've assessed and what we know, and then GES, which is where we want to go. So we can identify from our assessments aspects of the marine environment that are not yet in GES, or perhaps that are in GES, but potentially are maybe at risk of falling out of GES. And then targets will help us to guide progress towards what we need to do in terms of maybe additional monitoring, what assessments are needed. So the focus on targets is important. And Ireland has 49 to 50 targets, I think, is it at the moment, that relate specifically to marine activities. But all of these need to be adhered to when we're considering licensing and development to see, where there may be possible impact. And so eventually our environmental targets essentially are how we navigate towards achieving GS. So I'll just go through maybe a couple of worked examples. So if you just go on to the next slide, please, Sean. Thank you. So here, descriptor 2, non-Indigenous species. So here, good environmental status is described as when the number of non-Indigenous species which are newly introduced via human activity into the wild per assessment period, which is our 6 years, measured from the reference year, is minimized and where possible reduced to 0. So our target in that instance is to continue to reduce the risk of introduction and spread of non-Indigenous species linked to ballast water, because that's one of the key vectors, and hull fouling through the implementation of the Ballast Water Convention. And so that's our target. And then in this instance, we have achieved good environmental status within Ireland's marine environment on the basis of what is required under GES. So another example, just move on there, please, Sean. So here is seafloor integrity. So again, good environmental status is described as, it's achieved when criteria have not exceeded threshold values. And don't worry too much about the percentages and the coding here, but essentially that 2% refers to loss, and the 25% refers to disturbance. So these are the kind of criteria that we're to adhere to and work towards when we're assessing GES in this particular descriptor. So the extent of adverse effects from disturbance and status from the Habitats Directive. So again, you can see the connections with other directives. These are the two things that we have to bear in mind. So in terms of our target, the structure and functions of the ecosystems and benthic ecosystems in particular are not adversely affected due to the spatial extent and distribution of physical disturbance and physical loss in the seabed. And in our case, we've managed to achieve good environmental status for seafloor integrity. You'll see 74% of Ireland's assessment area is in good environmental status, but 11% is not in good status, and that's the kind of red you can see there. And just to note that when it comes to the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, you tend to use a kind of traffic light system. It's either in good environment status, it's either in GS or not in GS, so green or red. But then there's an unknown category, and in this instance, in the case of seafloor integrity, you can just see the kind of dark and black areas there off the west coast. So they're areas that just haven't been surveyed yet. So we don't actually know what the state of our seabed is there. So that's more work to be undertaken, and is currently being undertaken as part of Infomar. Just one finally more example there, please, Sean. Contaminants. So again, GES is described as when the health of species are not adversely affected due to contaminants, and when biological and ecological effects are below the criteria agreed under OSPAR, and this is where OSPAR comes in. Again, at present, this is limited to the evaluation of the reproductive impairment of gastropods with TBT. So our target in this instance is to continue to ensure concentrations of contaminants do not exceed the threshold values set within the directive. And in this case, good environmental status has again been largely achieved for our waters. And the next slide goes on to, I suppose, a more worked up example of that. If you just move on, please, Sean. Thank you. So here, this is now where you can see, so in the case of contaminants, remember if you think back to our triangle at the outset, so the descriptor is D8 contaminants. We have 4 features, so we have ubiquitous, persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic substances, and then those other substances that are considered as non-UBPT contaminants. We have so the other 2 features then are TBT, which is a chemical used to treat hulls of vessels, and then we have oil and other spills. So these are our 4 features, and then we have 3 criteria against which these are to be assessed. So we have concentrations for the contaminants, both UBPT and non-UBPT. For biological effects, it's like I said, it's what has been the impact of TBT on gastropods, and then looking at acute pollution events in the terms in the case of oil and other spills. So if you move on there, please, Sean. So here you can see the level of chemicals in Ireland's coastal and marine environment are low. So for all those measured, you can see the green. Again, there's some unknowns there, but for the vast majority that we do measure, they are acceptable levels. You'll see some aren't, and again, they tend to be, I suppose, legacy hotspots in terms of, so again, TBT, which was used for an extensive period up to recently in a lot of coastal areas. So you'll see legacy concentrations of TBT in certain waters, but overall, its general presence within our marine waters has been reduced. And the same with mercury. There's kind of hotspots in certain areas. So if we just move on to another work example, just next slide there, please. So again, eutrophication. So again, here you can see eutrophication, good environmental status is being achieved for within our marine environment. Now, that's not to say that we don't have issues with eutrophication, but the overall picture for our marine environment is that we've achieved GES. We, as everyone knows, we do have hotspots again, which tend to be in embayments or kind of inner water areas where concentrations of nutrients tend to be a problem. So again, lagoons, I know, have recently been in the news as an issue. So it's not to say that we don't have eutrophication. It's just to say that in terms of GES, we've achieved it, and that it's and that we have overall achieved that for our overall marine waters. Just move on again, please, Sean. So here is just underwater noise, D11. So again, it's just to show how this is measured or assessed in terms of continuous noise and impulsive noise. So again, you can see we've achieved GES, but from the map you can see from our waters, if you compare to say the channel there between France and England, the level of noise caused by vessels is obviously going to be higher where you have more vessels. So for continuous noise, we're in a relatively good position compared to other member states. Impulsive noise, then, this is where I suppose you have things that are, to do with site works. And again, you'll see we're in a good position there. And the target is to, no more than 20% of a marine habitat can be exposed to impulsive noise over a given day, and no more than 10% over a year. So just to move on to the final slide, I think, Sean. Thank you. So yeah, just some takeaways. So again, I've hoped you understand that the spatial dimension is a really important aspect of the MSFD. Spatial planning, both terrestrial and marine, can support the implementation of the directive, really in terms of identification and reduction of pressures and impacts, managing land-sea interactions, data information to inform our understanding of GES are all things I think that will come under the heading there. There's really good alignment between MSFD and other directives, but the challenge is to ensure the coherency is identified and optimized. So many directives and instruments have objectives that support GES, because ultimately sustainable use is a core shared objective across those directives. But it's, sometimes the issue is in terms of using data, collect once, use often. Again, I refer back to the Habitats Directive and the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. They have similar ones in terms of data in relation to biodiversity, for example. Planning and environmental protection share common elements within their processes. So again, engaging stakeholders, determining cumulative impacts, the cyclical and iterative nature of both processes are worth noting. Again, probably the most important cross-cutting element is to consider is climate change. And currently efforts are being taken to understand how better to incorporate climate change into the MSFD. And the MSFD is, just for your information, is undergoing a revision, or will undergo a revision. It's had a review, and the decision has been taken that it will need to be revised in the coming years. So, and part of that revision will include bringing the inclusion of climate change into the directive in a more strengthened way, and trying to give more robust and more legal kind of strength to the environmental targets, and for them, potential for them to be set at regional EU levels. And I think that is me, and hopefully I'm within time as well. Thanks, everyone. Before I finish, I'd like just to acknowledge my colleagues, Catherine Cronin and Sorkin Longford, who contribute to putting this presentation together. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Cathal. That's absolutely fascinating, and the level of detail is wonderful to see, because I think when you look at those descriptors, food webs is an incredibly complex and dynamic entity to just try and grasp. And I know from back in the early... What? I know you didn't mention that one. Stay away from that one. I remember, initial stages of SFD or reporting on 9 and 10, baselining Ireland's status. So it's very, very encouraging to see that certain GES, the information is there, and that we're able to say that we have met it, albeit within the confines of those parameters. So look, I have lots of questions for you later after the session. Maybe you're not too happy about that, but...
No, that's no problem. Yeah, look forward to it. Thanks, Ali.
We might just move on now, and as I said, we'll compile all the questions at the end. So thank you so much, Cathal, and well done. You can have an old gin and tonic there. So look, our next guest, I am absolutely delighted, and poor old Ronan, I've been in touch with him a few times this year to ask him to present, is Ronan Boyle, who is Director of Navigation, Maritime and Consenting in the Commissioner of Irish Lights. And, no matter where we look out on the coast, we will see something that is managed or comes under the remit of the Commissioners of Irish Lights. And my own particular draw is for the Kish Lighthouse, of course, and a sentinel on the Kish Bank for any of us who use Dublin Bay as our playground. So I'm delighted to hand you over to Ronan. And Ronan, you might want to just give a brief introduction of yourself, and good luck.
Thank you, Ali, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present. It's a great honour, and really appreciate the opportunity to showcase what Irish Lights can do to assist the marine spatial planning process. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ronan Boyle, and as Ali mentioned, I'm the Director of Navigation, Maritime and Consenting with Irish Lights, which is a long title, but basically it means that I look after the provision of navigation advice, the operation of our vessel, the Granuel, which I'll talk about later, and also the provision and facilitation of the consenting services of Irish Lights under the Merchant Shipping Act to make any changes to its navigation around the coast. My own background is predominantly seagoing. I spent 23 years in the Irish Navy. I was captain of 2 vessels there in my time at sea, and then I served ashore in various appointments, mostly around communications and information technology. And then I spent a number of years with the RNLI in a coastal management role, looking after the lighthouses between Wexford and Clare. And for the last nearly 7 years now, I've been with the Commissioners of Irish Lights as originally the Director of e-Navigation, and now the Director of Navigation, Maritime and Consenting. So I'm going to talk to you today about how Irish Lights interacts with marine spatial planning in general. But to do that, I need to kind of take a step back and firstly speak about how international shipping is regulated, which is probably something that not a lot of people think about very often. Certainly if you're ordering your goods via Amazon or any of the other online platforms and they miraculously appear a number of days later, or if you're in the supermarket and you can see the range of fresh fruit and vegetables, you don't always tend to question where those goods and items come from. And it's only really around times such as the pandemic or years around COVID, where the supermarket shelves were suddenly empty, that people started to realise that Ireland is actually an island and it's hugely dependent on maritime trade just to keep things moving. So the regulation of the international shipping as a commercial entity, I suppose, is overseen by the International Maritime Organization. And that has evolved over the years through a layered system of regulation, through registration of vessels under a particular flag, which is called flag state control, through the inspection of vessels when they arrive in a particular country, which is called port state control, and then a number of services which have to be provided under the auspices of what's called the coastal state. And each of those have different responsibilities, but they're all interconnected under the United Nations Convention for the Law of the Sea. So if we kind of look at it this way, and I'm sure you're probably familiar with UNCLOS, but the basis of UNCLOS obviously would have started with the claiming of a certain amount of the seabed, and it was usually connected with the range of the cannon, whatever they could meet at the time, which would have started out around 3 miles and then was expanded to 6 miles and eventually settled on 12 miles for territorial seas. And then beyond territorial seas, you have the contiguous zone out to 24 miles and the EEZ out to 200 miles. And there can be certain seabed rights claims then that go beyond 200 miles. But in terms of shipping, then the ships at sea are obviously flagged to an individual state. So that's where the flag state control comes in. When they arrive into the next port of call, that country, that state has certain port state control rights. And these are regulated in a regional sense, but also in a global sense. So shipping going in both directions can be inspected under port state control. And then I suppose the coastal state can have varying degrees of interaction with the territorial seas, the contiguous area, and the EEZ, depending on the legislation of that particular country. So coastal state responsibilities can extend from 12 out to 200 miles, depending on the particular legislation in play. So how does this all tie together then? It all comes together under the International Maritime Organization, as I said, and that basically has 4 pillars in terms of its conventions. And the top one there, you're probably all familiar with, the SOLAS Convention, Safety of Life at Sea, and that came into effect after the sinking of the Titanic in 1912. The first SOLAS Convention was adopted in 1914 as a means of effectively correcting that error. STCW, the Standards of Training, Certification and Watchkeeping, started to emerge as a convention around the late 1970s. And again, that grew out of a number of incidents where there was varying degrees and standards of training applied to seafarers worldwide. So the decision was taken to effectively make them all accountable and all standardized across all of the flag state regimes. MARPOL, maritime pollution, again developed around the early 60s, and as these things tend to do, it followed a particular pollution disaster in 1967, where the Tory Canyon vessel had a major oil spillage, and the genesis of MARPOL goes back to then. And then the Maritime Labour Convention, a later convention, but coming in around 2006. And this was created by the International Labour Organization to consolidate and modernize the standards for seafarers worldwide. So the main one that Irish Lights is interested in is the SOLAS Convention. And it's under SOLAS that we are effectively tasked with the provision of the AIDS Navigation Service. And that's under Regulation 13 of Chapter 5 of SOLAS. Ireland is a contracting government of the Safety of Life at Sea Convention, as is the UK. And most other Western societies of the 170 odd that make up the International Maritime Organization are contracting governments of SOLAS. So the provision here is that the contracting government must provide the ACE navigation in line with the volume of traffic and the degree of risk. So there's an element of judgment and that needs to be applied as to whether a particular ACE navigation is required. It is a coastal state responsibility, as I mentioned, and in terms of Ireland, it's delegated under the Merchant Shipping Act to Irish Lights as the General Lighthouse Authority. So that's the wording, the term that's used in the Merchant Shipping Act to describe Irish Lights as a general lighthouse authority. So I suppose this underpins the importance of maritime trade to Ireland. As I said, it's a huge area, first of all, that we have to be responsible for in terms of our EEZ. It's the 6th largest EEZ of all of the EU countries. And overall, the shipping and maritime sector is a large proportion of the Irish economy, nearly 2.5 billion. You've often heard it said that 90% of goods and trades passes by sea in and out of Ireland. And also what's becoming increasingly clear now is that data and the transmission of data via subsea cables is also around that 90 to 95% percentage in terms of the transactions that go to and fro every day. So it's a hugely important area that needs to be protected, and it can be damaged quite quickly, and it's quite difficult to repair. Just to kind of give a little bit of background, and I won't dwell on this, and I'll fly through a couple of slides with images, so there won't be too much text. But just to kind of give you a bit of background of what is an aid to navigation, because it's mentioned in the SOLAS Convention. So an aid to navigation in our world effectively is a device, system or service which is external to the vessel. And it's designed and operated to enhance safe and efficient navigation of individual vessels and or vessel traffic. So that could include lighthouses, as everyone will be familiar with. It could also and does include buoys. It can include electronic aids to navigation, such as automatic identification system, AIS. There are other electronic aids as well, such as radar beacons. But it can also include and does include vessel traffic services. There aren't any vessel traffic services around the Irish coast, but there are, if you go further afield into the English Channel and up into the Dover Straits, there are vessel traffic services which are effectively the maritime equivalent of air traffic control services for ships. So they're guided into particular lanes that they have to follow. And then if there's any deviation or any risk of a collision, that's assisted from ashore. So VTS is likely to become more prevalent as we continue to build out into the maritime environment. The likelihood is that shipping lanes will become more condensed, which would then lend itself to the requirement for additional VTS services. So an aid to navigation then is distinguished from a navigation aid, I suppose, and that's a degree of pedantry, but it's just to distinguish between what's on the ship and used to navigate on the ship versus what's external to the ship and used to assist. So in terms of, everyone will be familiar with lighthouses as an aid to navigation. This is Hookhead Lighthouse. It's the oldest one on the island of Ireland. And it's obviously located on the Hook Peninsula down in Wexford. But then if you kind of contrast that with a navigation aid, this is a radar set on board a ship. And again, this is an aid to navigation. This is St. John's Lighthouse in County Down in Northern Ireland, whereas this electronic chart system is a navigation aid. One that you'll all be familiar with is the Fastnet light on the southwest coast of Ireland. And then an echo sounder, again, on board the bridge of a ship. So other types of aids to navigation then, which you may be less familiar with, because everyone kind of thinks of the lighthouses when you think of the Commissioner of Irish Lights, but that's certainly one aspect of the service that is provided, but it's not the entire story as such. And we're maybe a victim of our own success to a certain degree, in that we had a very successful conference in Dublin Castle last week where we were talking about the potential for maritime tourism and heritage projects emerging from lighthouse locations. So it's something that is very high up in the public consciousness. But what people don't see, I suppose, is that the buoy network provides the backbone of how the ships are safely guided at sea. So the slide here is to illustrate what a typical lateral buoy, port and starboard buoy, looks like. And that's worldwide, that's divided into 2 regions, and that's all coordinated internationally by another international body, IALA, the International Association of Marine Aids to Navigation. of which Ireland is a member and sits on the council, and that council seat is represented by the Commissioner of Irish Lights. So we're very heavily involved with IALA. The standardisation of the maritime buoyage scheme worldwide has been one of the huge kind of flags or one of the feathers in the cap of IALA, in order to make sure that shipping, no matter where it's coming from or going to, all effectively speaks the same language, and we all interact with the information that's displayed on the charts in the same way, and that has a huge positive impact on safety of navigation. Interestingly, the regions, as I said, are split into two. So most of the world, as you can see in the green section there, is Region A, and the US and Japan are Region B. There's a lot of stories maybe about why this is the case. One story is that it's connected with the Revolutionary War in the US, and that the boys were deliberately switched from one side of the channel to the other to cause difficulties. But for whatever reason it originated, it has stuck. So if you go to the US, you'll see the starboard hand marks and the port hand marks are different colours than they are you'll be familiar with here. Other buoyage types that you'll see around the coast are cardinal marks. So in this case, this is to mark a particular point of interest, usually a danger, which sits in the centre, and you won't see an example where you have 4 buoys around it normally, but you might see one buoy just to alert the mariner to where the danger is in relation to the position of the buoy, and then they can work out from that where the safe water is. You'll also have these other types which are connected with individual dangers, so isolated danger marks, safe water marks, such as the safe water mark which exists outside the Port of Cork. These are kind of like rendezvous points, effectively normally located outside ports, which are, waypoints for the end of a voyage, effectively to start the journey into the pilotage water of the port. And then special marks, which have become much more important in recent years as the offshore renewable energy has started to dominate the maritime area. The requirement for special marks has gone up considerably because all of the LiDAR buoys, all of the data acquisition buoys are all marked as special marks, and it's really important that the applicants and the agencies which are putting these to sea are aware of the conventions in terms of what type of buoyage to use. And then new danger marks. So these are typically wreck marking buoys. If a vessel collides with something or grounds on the seabed, it's up to the General Lighthouse Authority or the port and harbour, in the case of an incident inside the port, to deploy one of these wreck marking buoys and make sure that the main danger in the case of a wreck is that another vessel will collide with the original vessel, and you compound the error. So just some photos then to illustrate what these look like in reality, and people are often surprised by the physical size of some of these things. The picture on the left there is a South Cardinal mark, and it's just suspended by the crane. It's being lowered into the sea to be towed over to our vessel, the Granuel, and it's taken on board the vessel and deployed out to sea. And then on the right-hand side, you've got a couple of wreck marking buoys, which thankfully aren't used very often in our case, but they are kept available for use, one on the ship and one in our headquarters here in Dún Laoghaire. So we're always ready to respond to wrecks and new dangers if required. I mentioned the special marks, and here's some just pictures to show you what they typically look like at sea. An ocean data acquisition system buoy, an Otis buoy on the left, and then one of our own Marine Institute buoys on the right, again tasked with collection of data at sea. So a requirement for additional power usually to drive sensors, so a lot of solar panels, but the colouring excuse me, and the top mark are denoted as special marks under the IALA scheme. But then this voyage isn't always at sea as such, and you'll often see examples of it ashore in terms of beacons and poles, marks, etc., which are also transmitting information to the mariner when they're coming in out of port. So the special mark can appear as a pole ashore, and it's often used as a cable marker, which is also an aid to navigation because it appears on the on not just on the electronic chart, but also on the original paper charts. And this is really important from the point of view of the planning authority, but also from the point of view of a mariner, to make sure that they understand where the cables are, and particularly in the vulnerable foreshore area where they're coming up onto land, where the cables might be damaged. So it's really important that these are correctly charted. Some other items that aren't always aids to navigation, but could possibly be, if you have what's called an acoustic Doppler current profiler, which is used to measure various parameters at sea. You might require an aid to navigation for that. It might be mounted on a buoy and facing downwards to measure depth. In that case, you're going to require some kind of special mark arrangement there. And also, if it's placed on the seabed, it's sometimes placed on the seabed with a remote control recovery apparatus, which effectively inflates when it's time for the ADCP to be recovered and makes it pop up to the surface. But if the reduction in depth there is such that it may be a danger to surface navigation, it may require a special mark at the surface in addition. And Irish Lights can advise you on that to let you know which may apply. So generally, moorings, as in the mooring buoys, which you tie up your boat to when you've finished your racing or your cruising, that they're not considered to be aids to navigation, except where they kind of reach a size where they need to be permanently plotted on the chart, as in the case of the larger mooring buoys on the right-hand side. So they would be considered aids to navigation, especially if they're marked and coloured in the IALA scheme. So that's just a bit of background on, what is an aid to navigation for anyone who maybe hasn't come across them before, and how does Irish Lights then provide the superintendence and management of that service. So I suppose we're quite a small organisation in one sense. We've 126 full-time staff, and we're based here in Dún Laoghaire, as I said. But we also have obviously a lot of legacy locations around the island of Ireland. The last of our lighthouses to be manned with a lighthouse keeper was the Bailey Light in Dublin, which was 1997 when that became automated. And those lighthouse keepers now have become what are termed attendants and they've continued working on in an attendant capacity where they didn't need to be 24/7 tied to the light, but they were still taking care of it. And as those attendants have retired, effectively through technology, we have made the lighthouse service more and more automated. That's good in a way, obviously, but in another way, we want to retain that connection with the coast. So we're reaching out through other avenues to link in with the coast, primarily through the Great Lighthouses of Ireland, and linking up with communities which are centred on our lighthouses as their the core of their offering in terms of maritime tourism. In terms of the provision of the statutory service, then we directly provide the general aids navigation around the coast. So that consists of the 64 lighthouses all around the Irish coast, including Ireland and Northern Ireland. And I suppose the reason that we are tasked with looking after the aids navigation in Northern Ireland as well goes back to our history. Irish Lights originally was established not as Irish Lights, but as a corporation to make the port of Dublin more commodious, I think was the word, and it goes back to 1786. So it wasn't until then, 1810, that original corporation, which was focused on Dublin, was tasked with looking after lighthouses around the entire Irish coast. And then in 1854, that corporation was effectively split in two. One half became the Commissioner of Irish Lights, the other half became Dublin Port, as it is today. So the two organisations share a common route. And then in 1894, the majority of our current legislation, as it still stands, in fact, was enacted. And that is the Merchant Shipping Act of 1894. That legislation was carried forward then in 1935 when, following the establishment of the Irish state. the elements of the existing legislation were carried forward. So they're still in force today in Ireland under the 1894 Act, and in Northern Ireland, we are the General Lighthouse Authority for Northern Ireland under the United Kingdom 1995 Merchant Shipping Act. So it gives a degree of complexity, but it also gives a great facility to interact with our partners and sister organisations in the UK in terms of lighthouse and aids navigation provision. I won't dwell on our strategy, except to say it's probably encapsulated in the first line there, which is safe navigation for all, and that's really about the provision of both the general aids navigation service and also the quality assurance of the local aids navigation service. And the remaining items in the strategy then really kind of support that main effort. So if we talk a little bit about the general aids navigation service, and I'll have mentioned it already about the SOLAS Convention, why we're tasked to do it. More recently then, the Irish government, but also the UK government, has ratified the IALA Convention, which has changed the IALA organisation from a non-governmental organisation into an intergovernmental organisation. So previously, when Irish Lights attended IALA, we were attending as Commissioners of Irish Lights, but now the members attending IALA attend as the member states. So we attend on behalf of Ireland in that regard. So under both of those conventions, then we're tasked under the Merchant Shipping Act to provide superintendence and management for all lighthouses, buoys and beacons. We have certain powers to make changes to those, and we also, under the 1993 Merchant Shipping Act, have the authority to mark and remove wreck and to render it harmless, effectively, as the language that's used. And under the 1997 Act, we have powers to manage and superintend all radio navigation systems. So quite a broad range of powers relating to aids navigation at sea. The requirements for availability for these different types of aids navigation are set by their categorization under the IALA Convention. So for Category 1 aids navigation, which are considered vital to navigation, they have to be available 99.8% of the time, which is about 17 hours of downtime in a year. So it's a very high level of availability to maintain, and our crews and our ship are constantly working to do that. When you get down to Category 2 and 3, then that moves down to 99% availability, and then for Category 3, it's 97% availability. So you have a little bit more breathing space in that regard. But it's still very important that the aids navigation are up to those percentages. And how do we do that in practice? So it's mainly done through the services which are provided by our vessel, the Irish Lights vessel Granuel, which our current Granuel was commissioned in the year 2000, but obviously designed before that. It's 80 meters long. It's what's called DP1, so dynamic positioning, which means that its position can be controlled by the satellite system, so the GPS, Galileo, etc. You take in those positions and the ship will automatically hold that position, which is required for being able to operate up close to, for example, the Kish Lighthouse, as Ali mentioned earlier. This is you can see the crane of the Granuel there and the ship operating beside it to transfer stores on, and also to operate beside buoys. So you'll see one of the cardinal marks there in the slings on the crane, which is being loaded on board for maintenance in that case, and before being put back into the water. So the vessel it's a multi-purpose vessel. It's set up to operate with the various other pieces of equipment which are available around the state. So we support the Coast Guard with search and rescue. We support the Marine Institute with operation of the Holland 1 ROV. We've also worked with that's the remotely operated vehicle. We've also worked with the British Geological Survey to operate their remotely operated vehicle. All of these have certain weight requirements and strengthening of the deck, etc., which the ship is set up to take. We operate with the Naval Service divers, and we carry their equipment in terms of their launch and recovery system, and also with the Garda water unit for any civil diving operations that are required. So it's it's a very capable vessel, and it's you might say, well, how do you do all that? How do you operate all the way around the coast with just one vessel? So we're supported, as I mentioned, through our operations with the other two general lighthouse authorities, and we collaborate very closely and provide mutual support to each other. So in total, there are 7 vessels effectively operating around the UK and Ireland, of which the Granuel is a part, and if our vessel is required to go into a scheduled dry dock or a maintenance period, then effectively cover is provided by the other vessels around the coast. You can see at the bottom of the screen there, you've got the Trinity House vessels, the Patricia, the Galatea, the Alert, which is based around the Dover Straits, and there's a fast reaction vessel, and then the Mare, which is based around the Bristol Channel. And then the last two on the right are the Pharos, which is one of the Northern Lighthouse Board vessels, and the Polestar. And there's actually a new Polestar being built for Northern Lighthouse Board at the moment, and will be launched in probably the end of this month or early next month. So you'll see that in the maritime press if you're connected there. So as I said, the Granuel was started its life in the year 2000. It's now 26 years old, and we've started a project working with the Department of Transport to define the requirements for what the next vessel will be needed to do effectively, and what capabilities the state will require for the next vessel. Obviously, we have our own requirements in terms of the continuation of the provision of the ACE navigation service, but there may be other requirements which emerge. Very interested to listen to Cathal's presentation and to hear what additional requirements may emerge on that side, and also in terms of things like being able to repair cables at sea if they're damaged, either intentionally or unintentionally. The ability to have a vessel available at short notice to do that will be crucial in the future. I mentioned about the superintendence and management of local ACE navigation. So Irish Lights provides this service, and we do provide it as a service to what are called local lighthouse authorities. So these are effectively, in a lot of cases, they can be local authorities. They can also be utility companies. They can be ports and harbours, but they are tasked with the operation of the local ACE navigation. And then Irish Lights provides the quality assurance to make sure that that's all done to the correct standards. And we provide a report on that every year to the Minister of Transport in both jurisdictions. In terms of how we assist the local lighthouse authorities to carry out their responsibilities, we provide them with a management portal where we provide information relating to all of their ACE navigation and a mechanism for facilitating changes to that, which are required by the 1894 Act in terms of a statutory consent. We also provide an online local lighthouse authority training course in collaboration with BIM, and we're very thankful to the support they offer in that regard. And then we provide an inspection and auditing service, which is basically required under the SOLAS Convention for Ireland as a contracting state to verify to the International Maritime Organization that we are fulfilling the requirements of SOLAS. So we inspect 2,500 of the 3,500 ACE navigation around the coast every year, and that's a huge undertaking. It's done effectively with 2 inspectors in their separate cars, and then the ship carries out a number of inspections as it goes around to do its statutory buoy work as well. So that's the safety of life at sea element of what Irish Lights does. But then obviously there's also the interaction with the maritime planning element, which has a slightly different focus, but again can be taken back to the provision of maritime safety. So in terms of how we interact with marine spatial planning, we are mentioned in the marine planning and policy statement as effectively a source of navigation and maritime expertise. And also one of the principles of the MPPS is that that it will support safety at sea, and in particular the safety of human life, through the provision of ACE navigation and by promoting a culture of vigilance. So that's really core to what Irish Lights, the services that we provide. At the next level down, we're also in the National Maritime Planning Framework, and we're mentioned here under 2 of the policies, ports, harbours and shipping, and also safety of sea. So it's set out there what interaction is required with Irish Lights in terms of making sure that the planning organisations are taking cognizance of safety of navigation. Historically, I suppose we have always interacted with the Foreshore Act in the past, and we're a statutory consultee. We remain so on the Foreshore Act, just for the remaining aquaculture elements and for the Daffin ports and harbours, which remain under the Act. And in the context then of the Maritime Area Planning Act, we also interact very closely with MARA. Just in the last couple of weeks, we've signed a cooperation agreement with MARA, and we were the first regulatory body to do so. So very happy to collaborate very closely with MARA and make sure that we're 100% on the same page there. In terms of how the legislation is put together, I suppose the idea was to streamline the establishment or the granting of a maritime area consent. And for that reason, then it's a deliberate feature of the Act. There isn't a consultation in advance of the provision of a MAC. And I suppose Irish Lights would and has expressed a concern about that in terms of where the MAC might be geographically placed and the need to have some navigational expertise around that. So we're working with MARA to see how that might be accommodated in future. And then in terms of the marine licensing and the MUL, all of the MUL applications are published, so we interact very closely with MARA to make sure that we're aware of those, and if we have any feedback, we can make MARA aware of that. Following on from the granting of the MAC, then once it goes to a development consent, we again are a prescribed person or a prescribed body under the Planning and Development Act, particularly under the SI 100 of 2023, as applies to development consents which go through on Comisiún Pleanála. That SI doesn't currently apply to coastal planning authorities, and that's why this presentation is really key from our perspective, because we would like to make the coastal planning authorities aware of the services and the assistance that we hope we can provide. Certainly, we will not slow down the process in any way, but we're very open to engaging and working with you to make sure that if there are any safety of navigation queries, that we're in a position to answer them and move things along. So how can we assist, I suppose, is the question. If you come to us and you request assistance with a planning application, we have access to all of the AIS data, which is the automatic identification system, which is a required carriage requirement on all SOLAS compliant vessels. So effectively, it keeps the track of where they've been, and you can run traffic analysis against it. So it gives you a very good picture of the density of shipping going in and out of an area, and which areas may be a problem for if you're making a change or if you're adding a feature into the maritime environment, how typical shipping patterns will interact with that. We also have a lot of expertise in how information is passed on to the hydrographic organisations. So in terms of being able to connect with the UK Hydrographic Organisation, which provides most of the Admiralty charts, as they're called, around the Irish coast. We have a lot of connections there, and we can make sure that any new additions to the maritime environment are correctly charted. And that's really important when you come to something like a wreck, for example, because you want to make sure that there's a full understanding of where the wreck is in connection with other features which might be on the seabed, such as submarine cables, etc. So that type of knowledge may not be universally held by all of the local authorities, and it makes a lot of sense then if you have a query to come to Irish Lights, and we'll be able to assist. I touched on it briefly, but the whole language of nautical charts is really something that it's a study in itself. And as I said, it's an expertise that we hold in-house. It's common amongst mariners, and maybe we don't appreciate that it's not a commonly held piece of knowledge elsewhere. But we're certainly willing to do the translation piece there if there are any concerns or queries. Just as an example,
Ronan, I just mentioned time there, Ronan, just so we have Q&A.
Yeah, thank you, Ali. Yeah, I'll fly through these. Yeah, this is just a quick look at the complexity of what might emerge in terms of routing systems. So this is basically traffic at sea, ships and roundabouts, etc. So just finally, and thank you for the heads up on time, Ali. I just wanted to finally mention just a very quick mention of a project we're working on with Met Éireann, which is to equip our ACE navigation buoys around the coast with additional sensors for data collection. Apologies, it's a typo there. So that's data collection in terms of wave sensors, but also we're looking at broadening that out to wind speed and direction, water temperature, air temperature, etc. So that project is running out as part of the national flood forecasting system, and it'll be centered around particular areas of population on the coast, but it's expected to expand. As a public body, we're mandated to make that information available. So for trusted organizations, we can establish an API which would give you the real-time access to the information. For research organizations, we also have what's called an ERDAP server, which is where you can download the historical records for any studies. And then all of our data is up on ocean data or opendata.gov.ie in terms of our own AIDS navigation positions and types. We don't publish the live feed to the Med-Ocean data on that site because it's dynamic, but we will make that available for trusted partners as people come to us. So that's it, just the takeaways from the presentation, just the background to what Irish Lights does, why it does it under the SOLAS Convention, the responsibilities that we have in relation to general, local and ACE navigation and also REC. And also the expert advice to both to applicants going into the process of applying for maritime planning, but also to the agencies which have to make those decisions. We're very open to liaising with both. So our desired outcome then is for a safe change management regime effectively for the maritime space, so zero incidents and no pollution. My email is on the last slide, so I'll make that available via Sean, and if anyone wishes to contact me for any further information, please do so. Thank you.
Ronan, that's fantastic. I mean, an incredibly comprehensive and detailed presentation, so thank you so much for that. Now, we've gone slightly over time, but I think it was well worth it to see those wonderful interactions and the relationship to MSP. But if you don't mind, there are a couple of questions. There's one for Cathal, and then I think I had a few myself, but you answered them in respect to the data, because huge data acquisition opportunities there for CIL. So ERDAP and your Irish Lights API, I think that potentially is where we need to go in terms of cumulative assessment. Monitoring is coming up time and time again. How do we, what is the framework for monitoring? How do we implement best practice around monitoring? So there's a lot of data out there already, but we also need to learn monitoring regimes and how to do it. So thank you for bringing that up. Just the question that was raised there from Derek, and look, under UNCLOS, we know it is a requirement under law and Irish law to have AIS turned on. What do you see as the challenge in enforcing it? Because, you know, a ship comes into port, it must have its AIS. Are you finding occurrences where the law has been broken?
Well, I suppose we are aware of occurrences where ships may turn off their AIS. In the past, it would have happened for different reasons. Historically, commercial fishing vessels would have been less inclined to turn on their AIS because they were, I suppose, worried that the competitors might see where they were fishing. Nowadays, we certainly see and are aware of, you know, vessels which turn off their AIS for more nefarious reasons, usually kind of vessels in the dark fleet, as it's called, who are, you know, effectively moving oil around without the proper authorizations rather. So it is an issue, and I think it's something that Ireland is probably going to seek to address in the context of the maritime security strategy, which is being developed by the Department of Defence at the moment. And Irish Lights have engaged with the department, and you know, we're certainly amenable to making our capabilities available to support that. But it's not our core function in terms of the provision of ACE navigation as such.
Thank you for that, Ronan. I have another question we might come back to, but I just wanted to ask Cathal a question, if that was okay.
Sure.
In respect, Cathal, to the scripts under MSFD, and again, you've referred to detailed monitoring, and you're mentioning there TBTs and collation of information around contaminants. So you're obviously collecting a lot of data and there's a lot of reporting at quite a high resolution. First question is, where is all of that data? Is it held under the European EMODnet type programs? And the second question would be, is there the opportunity, and this is from Alan, is there the opportunity to look and learn, I suppose, from the GES framework and program of measures and translate that down or scale that down to project level program of measures for future, for cumulative assessment and potentially monitoring strategy?
Okay, yeah, so I suppose the first one, in terms of where the data sits, I suppose it sits in a number of locations, but ultimately the central repository for data that's submitted under every member state for MSFD goes to ReportNet. But then what's in ReportNet is a combination of what's in, say, EMODnet, Ali, or what is held in other databases, the WISE database as well. So it's that's I suppose the central repository for the information. And then you do have a variance, I guess, because as you've seen there, some data sets are just wholly national. They're collected, on a national basis. Others are part of a wider European program of collections. So they each will, have they're not all one size fits all in terms of their kind of data curation and where they're stored. But ultimately, the ReportNet is where, for MSFD, that's where you'll find all the information that's collated. The second one on, I guess, looking at projects and relationship to GES, that's a good question. I think maybe a first port of call would be if I would direct people towards the guidelines MARA have prepared, because within that they've set out it's like an assessment of impact on maritime usage, and within that they're asking applicants when they're describing their project to be cognizant of how it relates to the MSFD. So that would be a kind of first port of call for drawing the dots between what it is you think your project is doing and how it relates to GES and to what scale. Because I think in that they list a number of sections whereby they ask applicants to provide information. Not all are going to be applicable, but again, I think they even ask you to, if they're not applicable, to give an explanation as to why you think they're not applicable. So yeah, that would probably be the first place to, but it would direct people. I hope that's answered the question.
Well, I think, yeah, absolutely, Colin. Thank you, because I mean, both presentations today show the huge scope, albeit at different scales, of data acquisition. And this is going to be and is becoming, a hot topic as to how we manage that, standardize what data sets need to go where, and a monitoring framework for cumulative assessment into the future. So it's really good to see it from the MSFD scale to something like, an acoustic buoy taking data, out in our deeper waters. Just one more question then, Ronan, if Cathal, thank you so much, and I'll close now in a moment.
And just before that, I should add that, sorry, Ali, I was just going to say that, I just wanted to add that the reason I didn't give my email in the presentation is we've moved departments, but our email is still housing. So I will, once my email is updated, I'll provide it to Sean and yourselves, and I can add it into the presentation for any questions that come afterwards. Sorry.
Perfect, and thank you so much, Cathal. Just Ronan, one question in respect to the second half of your presentation there, and I suppose the interaction with the CIL and its infrastructure in MSP. What do you see as the opportunities and or the challenges for, let's say, objectives under the National Marine Planning Framework to develop ports? Because obviously your infrastructure is intrinsic to the approach of ports, to the management of ports, and the analysis there, and that's at the terrestrial on the land side, but also the impact and opportunities potentially, you touched on it, for the offshore piece around new cabling, new infrastructures, new platforms. That's going to place quite a big demand on CIL to manage those kind of land versus sea interactions into the future.
Yeah, so I suppose the wider context for both of those pieces really is the development of the phase one projects in offshore renewable energy primarily, but also, as you mentioned, the requirement for additional data cables, which Ireland will have. So Irish Lights is involved in both of those aspects. We're engaged with all of the phase one projects, and we're engaged now with Commission Canada as they make their way through the planning process. So we'll continue to be involved in terms of the assessment of the lighting and marking plans that are associated with each of those projects, and then the eventual consenting of each of the individual turbine aids navigation and the construction voyage during the various phases of the project. So it's the opportunity, I suppose, is one of being able to develop the services which are required to grow out these various areas, and that's really fundamentally, I suppose, whether the commercial semi-state ports are in a position to prepare themselves, whether they have the right funding mechanisms in place to kind of look ahead and prepare themselves for business that they don't currently have. So I think the outlook is very positive, but there's a degree of uncertainty about which direction it's going to take, which I think will be answered to a large extent by the national DMAP, which is expected to be published around following the consultation around 2027. So I think that's really something to look forward to, and it'll provide a very strong guidance for ports about how they need to develop. And Irish Lights will obviously support that in terms of the provision of aids navigation services ourselves, but also the support for the local lighthouse authorities, whether that's a port or a local authority, to provide the services that are needed to make sure that ORE sector can be properly supported.
Excellent. I think it's really positive to see your working relationship that you've established with MARA, and that's kind of formalised, and that potentially sets a precedent for other agencies to look at that as a template. So congratulations on that. I suppose that, CIL has been around for so long, and you touched on the terrestrial infrastructure. We see it every day, but we probably don't actually tweet, this is an element that we all need to consider in MSP, certainly for the coastal authorities. And I think today was great for everyone on the call to get to meet you and see you and hear from the CIL. And I have no doubt we'll be hearing a lot more based on the engagements you outlined today. So look, I think great, and a massive thank you to Cathal and to Ronan, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. And look, we'll call it there. We're a little bit over time, and look forward to seeing everyone hopefully next week, where it's coastal change is going to be discussed by Colin Ryan, also a member of the PI MSP committee, will present on that, and then coastal resilience and the challenges therein with Professor Robert Nichols. So look, thanks to everyone, and thanks to the IPI for hosting it, and have a good day and enjoy the weekend.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.